Hey everyone, it's Lilly. First of all, I want to thank you for watching my videos. Remember that you can download my episodes on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and listen to it when you're on the go. Before I begin today's episode though, I just want to give a special shout out to Tamra, aka TamCon72, for being such a loyal supporter of Make Peace Not Beef and always leaving insightful, thoughtful comments on my videos. Thank you so much, Tamra. You know, for the longest time I've always wondered who the hell would even find my YouTube channel, and am I the only one liking all my videos? But reading your comment always makes my day, and it strengthens the belief that my videos will inspire others, and I will continue to put out quality content to educate and entertain so we can all overcome climate change sooner and build a more peaceful and sustainable world. So thank you so much, Tamra. I could not do this without you, and I really hope that you will continue to support me. For all my other listeners, please give me a like, subscribe, and comment down below. Your engagement really helps me boost my ranking on YouTube so more people can discover Make Peace Not Beef. Alright, without further ado, over to the recorded interview. Hello, fellow peacemakers. Welcome to episode 19 of Make Peace Not Beef. Today, we're going to talk about climate change, racial equality, mental health, and the hidden connection between all of them. You will learn about why all three issues are intimately connected and how climate change underpins and amplifies pretty much all other social issues. My guest today is Nivi Achanta. Did I say that correctly?
Nivi Achanta.
Nivi Achanta, let me say that right. My guest today is Nivi Achanta, the founder of the Soapbox Project, a modern media platform that sends you bite-sized action plans to fight climate change through weekly change letters. Nivi is a former consultant and podcaster turned entrepreneur. She is outspoken, fearless, deeply embedded in the community. She has spoken out against fast fashion, plastics, and most recently, the staggering environmental impact of Bitcoin. Nivi is not only passionate about tackling climate change and creating positive social impact, but her greatest talent lies in her ability to build a coalition that brings hundreds and thousands of others on board in the climate movement. Welcome to the show, Nivi. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, Lily. That was such a flattering intro, and what a hyped way to start my week and start this podcast. I am so excited to be on here.
Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So I moved from San Francisco to Seattle only a few months ago, so midway into the COVID pandemic. I graduated from UC Davis with degrees completely unrelated to environmental issues. I double majored in statistics and economics. And somehow found my way through starting various student organizations into the corporate world where I worked at Accenture. Lots of tea coming up on there. But all of my experiences led me to realize that the world was literally burning up and I wasn't doing enough. And I felt guilty and weird being in this corporate job, not taking meaningful action. So then I decided to start Soapbox Project, which Lily mentioned earlier, but it's basically my startup that makes social impact really easy for busy people. I'm assuming like everyone listening to the show.
Yeah. When did you become climate concerned?
I was raised mostly in California. I think environmental education was always prominent there. And I distinctly remember in second grade, we had this partnership with Whole Foods, which at the time was a local grocery store. Now it's huge, but they distributed their paper bags to our school and they were like, help us put positive recycling messaging. And so we learned about recycling. And I made like this rhyme called Be Mature, Save Nature. And I thought I was a genius. And, low key still think I am for making such a good I rhyme at an early age.
Are.
But yeah, whenever we learned about recycling, I remember I went home and I was like, why don't we have a recycle bin? And I was just like tiny little Nivi. Yeah, I was like up in arms. And my parents, so they immigrated from India. We all did when I was young. But the recycling conversation or the climate conversation hadn't even started. And so they were learning about it from me. I think those threads about climate have always been in my life, but it wasn't until college when things actually started to click. So this is going to sound pretty on brand for a aspiring consultant, but in my senior year of college, I decided my resume wasn't padded enough. So I started a chapter of student organization called Net Impact. I didn't know what I was going to do or really what it was, but fast forward, the organization really took off. And because of all the other members, We had a waste management team, a water management team, an
Wow.
education team, and everyone was tackling climate. And I was just helping connect them with their resources. But thanks to our 20 to 30 members, I started understanding how deeply other people care about these issues. By extension, it made me care. So I think those are the two main threads. And then the last one was just working at Accenture, already understanding how critical climate change was and feeling like I was at a big corporation and I could actually use the corporate power for good. It proved to be a lot harder than I thought. In 2018, I think that was like the most slap in the face after the wildfires in California. My partner's house burned down, and
And we will get into your Accenture story. So let's just spoil it for the audience. So eventually, Nivi got laid off from Accenture because she was trying to create social impact instead of focusing on profit. And unfortunately, your worth is deemed by how much value you can generate for the company in dollars. But I think it's so great that you had this vision guiding you this entire time and you knew you were focused on creating impact. And by the way, let me quickly ask you, so your parents, are they climate change deniers or do they support the work you do?
no, they support the work I do. I think my mom, especially, is so fascinating. I have never met another person who is like as old. She's not like super old, she's just a parent age. But being in your 50s and being able to learn stuff and change your mind and be open minded is something I don't see ever.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And actually, same here. I had to educate my parents on climate change. I feel like this is the first issue where the kids are educating their parents about, right? Because their
Totally.
generation, they didn't have to go through and they don't have to deal with in the future, but we do.
Totally.
So I feel you.
I
I love the
love
word
it.
change letter, by the way. Did you come up with that?
I did. I did. Yeah.
It's like newsletters for change or
Totally.
love it. Okay, without further ado, let's get into our first big topic of the day, which is the connection between climate justice and inequality. So many people see climate change as either a problem for the environmentalist or for the rich. So people from lower income communities may argue, I'm struggling to put food on the table, and you're telling me to save the planet? That's the least of my concerns when I'm living from paycheck to paycheck. So, Nivi, can you break it down for us? One, why climate change is so much more than just an environmental issue, and two, how climate disproportionately impacts lower income and racialized communities more than the rich, and why they should be caring about this.
Yeah, yeah. First of all, I think it's interesting how you asked that question on like many people see climate change as a problem for the rich. I think it should be. Like I think that it
Mm,
has been wealthy countries and wealthy people that have caused this problem. I was recently listening to the audiobook of All We Can Save. It's like a collection of women in the climate movement talking about their work and offering inspiring solutions for a path forward. And so there was this one chapter, and this woman was like, climate change is not the problem. It is the biggest symptom of the
yes.
problem, which is our economic system. And something really clicked because for so long I've been like, climate change is the most urgent problem. And it's very urgent.
Mm,
But the reason that we are where we are is because rich and wealthy and predominantly white communities around the globe, starting from colonization, they
absolutely.
have been extracting resources from poorer communities. And one way we've seen this manifest now is climate change. And so you might have heard of this place that's coined Cancer Alley in Louisiana. And it's where all of these major corporations, including oil and gas companies, dump their toxic waste in a place that they don't have to deal with it, which is a poor Black community in Louisiana. So climate change is a problem that the rich have created, and the burdens are faced by the poor. And this is not just in the United States. I think that it's so telling of our economic system when you have environmentalists from the United States that say, oh, developing countries should switch to solar and all of these things that are positive solutions. But it's like the work that our wealthy countries have done have put the developing countries where they are in the first place. And
Mhm.
I just think it's a cruel twist of our economic system that those same countries, whether it's like the global south or even cities within the United States, are being told to step up. So I think that wealthy people should step up. I obviously think that everyone should care, but I definitely think that people that hold more wealth even have more power to do something about it. Yeah, I'm personally very passionate about rallying people like me that in my previous life, I had a high paying job and I had the resources to do something about it. So that's actually
Mhm.
where I'm focusing my own impact. But to answer your second question, I just want to share a personal story about how climate change disproportionately impacts lower income communities. Basically, in 2018, California had its most devastating wildfires. I actually don't know how that record has changed. So, my partner is from this tiny town named Paradise, which was completely decimated by the campfire.
So now it's hell.
Yeah, they're rebuilding, but a significant portion of Paradise is under the poverty line. There are a predominantly white community, but they're
Mhm.
predominantly low income and old, like older people. So people that are disenfranchised from the system, like not young, rich, white, wealthy people
Right.
for the most part. And when Paradise was burning, the federal government took over a week to respond. So I was actually volunteering there and they had a tracker of like how many days until the federal government's going to come.
Oh
And I
my
don't
God.
remember how many days they got up till, but really the state showed up and the counties and stuff showed up, but the federal government was nowhere to be seen. Donald Trump was president at the time and he took his sweet time to declare it an emergency. And you might have seen, Lily, how different this was in Malibu when fires broke out there. Like Malibu's
Oh yeah.
place with rich people,
Celebrities.
celebrities.
Yep.
Exactly. They had private firefighters that were saving celebrities' homes. And that to me was like one of the moments where it clicked like, oh, climate change isn't just this natural phenomenon that exists and is going to hurt all of us. No, it is going to take its most severe toll on people that are the most vulnerable. And that's why I think it's important, if you haven't seen it yet, that you need to see how all of these issues are connected.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you on that. And you already see systemic inequality being manifested in wildfire response, right? Like
Yep.
rich areas get taken care of first. And then if you live in poor communities, God bless you, you can wait a few weeks or a month. Maybe by the time your house is already burned down, the government still hasn't responded. And yeah, these issues are real. And to your previous point, I definitely think environmental pollution disproportionately affects lower income communities, as you've mentioned in Louisiana with Cancer Alley. And also, I'm not sure if you've heard about the ongoing Flint water crisis for years,
Mm-hmm.
where African American communities were poisoned by toxic levels of lead in the water. And pollutions from landfills and heavy industries are constantly affecting these communities of color and causing respiratory diseases and cancer. And then on a global scale, outside of America, for sure, countries, especially developing countries, are feeling the impact of climate change. And I think I actually heard that the island is sinking, but no one is doing
Mm-hmm.
anything about it because you're a tiny island and no one's going to care. And
Yeah.
it's really sad, right? That countries most impacted have the least voice and representation in the UN.
Yeah, it's really sad. It's really something that I feel like if you have the resources, we should feel personally responsible. Like it is sad, but it's not a naturally occurring tragedy. Like we caused this. And I think the term developing country is also an interesting term because it's not like these countries, I don't think these countries just started developing. They were extracted for their resources and now
Mhm.
they are farther behind the Western world. Yeah, thanks for bringing up Flint. I think that's one of the most popular and well known examples of how all of these issues are interrelated.
Exactly. And the other problem I want to bring up is how climate change and consumption, all of this stuff is relative because I believe even the poorest person in America probably still wastes way more food than like your average person in a developing country. Like a person with low income in America probably still has access to way more food and probably tosses out way more food than a person from, let's say, a country in Latin America has access to overall. So that in itself is like inequality between the nations. And then within a nation, you also have inequality between the rich and poor. So
Yeah, I don't know the stats on food waste between poor households in the US and abroad, but I will say that every household is inevitably a reflection of the economic system.
exactly.
In the US, in food deserts, you have access to unhealthy food and
Yes.
maybe,
There we go.
yeah, I think definitely my perspective changed a lot the more I started zooming out and looking at all of these systems connecting
Correct.
instead of focusing on like me, Nivi, an individual.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes. There's a lot of commercial level food waste.
Yeah.
And with fast fashion like H&M, like cutting holes in their clothes when they're able to sell it by the end of the season, they toss it out instead of donating it to a clothing
Yeah.
drive. But climate change at this point is not just an environmental problem for anyone who thinks it is. It is a much broader problem that is directly tied to our economic system and our way of consumption. And you're right, climate change is just a symptom of who we are. This problem is produced by us. It's not a naturally occurring problem, as much as Donald Trump wants you to think that. Did you see that? I think a few years ago, he tried to bring up this argument that like climate change has been naturally occurring over the past 5 ice ages and things like that.
Yeah, I actually think so. I think it's complicated because people that are passionate about climate change or deny it, a lot of people regurgitate talking points that are given to them. And I realized that I just didn't have a strong foundation for my facts. And I was just like, the climate is changing, which is true. But in that presentation, he went through, okay, this is the difference between weather and climate, something that simple.
Exactly.
And then he laid out a graph of how, since the Industrial Revolution, this is the output that humans have had. And actually seeing that for me helped me talk about this more intelligently. And some people that are climate deniers only speak through their emotions. And I don't think there's any point really trying to convince them otherwise. But I think there are people that are like, okay, but this month is colder than last year the same time. So why is climate change real? And I think that's like a good opportunity where you could actually share some of these basic facts on like climate as a whole and zooming out on what climate change
Exactly.
actually means.
Correct. Yes, I agree with you. I get that from my friends all the time. Oh, like today's exceptionally cold, so that means climate change isn't real. But I'm like, there's a difference between weather and climate, right? One is happening locally at a time, whereas climate, you have to zoom out and you look at
Mhm.
the patterns in climate for the past 10 years or so.
Yeah.
And there's very telling scientific data that says this time around climate change is human caused because for the past 30 years, we basically increased the CO2 concentration by 50%. That is not a coincidence. The earth does not
Right.
do that. So if someone is passionate about racial justice, why should they and how can they incorporate climate justice into their activism?
If you're passionate about racial justice already, you probably know how interconnected climate is. And climate change is basically like an inequality multiplier across all of these things, whether you have a disability or whether you are a woman or not a male. Like climate amplifies so many existing inequalities. If you're looking for a starting point and still trying to see how these issues are connected, I think you have to talk to people that have already worked in the space. So, for example, the people that do look at climate efforts only through a climate change lens and don't see the other connecting issues are speaking from a position of privilege. So I'm including myself in this. So when I first started Soapbox, I cared about all of these issues. I cared about education, I cared about healthcare, I cared about racial justice, I cared about climate change, but I saw them as separate and I was like, I can't tackle all of these things at once. So let me start with climate. But the more I started listening, I started following climate activists on Twitter and not just white climate activists. There's this list called Green Voices of Color. So I think how you can start incorporating climate justice in your activism is if you come from a privileged perspective, start listening. I don't think that you have to be an expert or listen to every single person in order to take action, but while you're figuring out improvements to your individual life and to your community, make sure that you're already listening to people that have done this work for decades. I think it's really easy to be like a tech bro that's, oh, the world is
Yeah.
burning. I need to do something about it. Let me invent an app that keep track of your food waste. All of that is great. Apps are great. Technology is great. All of this stuff. But it's not going to be a holistic solution unless you incorporate the work of people that have been here for years before you. So I'm still learning. Some of the steps that I'm taking is reading more, listening to more podcasts, signing up for climate newsletters that are not just written by white people. Definitely just trying to listen more than I talk, which is hard for me because I like to talk a lot. I think it should be about progress, not perfection. And I'm trying my best. And I encourage people to try their best to listen and follow along.
You make a great point about paying attention and elevating minorities and marginalized communities and their voices. For example, listening to what the indigenous communities are saying, because I definitely see this divide. Like, even within Work and Climate, the organization that we're part of, I feel like most people who are working on climate change are privileged people, like myself included, right? All of us. We have a roof over our house, so therefore we have the energy to dedicate to solving climate. And very rarely do I hear about people from lower socioeconomic communities talking about climate. They're usually working towards some other issues, such as income inequality. And most people see these issues as disparate. So I'm just wondering, how can we build a coalition and be an ally to these communities and tackle both of these issues at the same time?
One thing that I've noticed after following many Indigenous people on Twitter is how much of a strong community foundation they have to discuss issues like climate, like income, like gender. And I think the main difference is a lot of privileged people think we need credit for our work. And I don't know
Yes.
how to undo that yet, but I've noticed that a lot of these Slack groups, like, we have to come up with an app or come up with a website. And obviously, I'm part of that. I made something, it's online. I'm like doing a podcast about it. But a lot of the people that I have learned the most from are doing their activism on a hyper local level where it might have
Hmm.
the most impact, but it's not the most noticed.
Got
And
it.
as I'm building Soapbox, how can we move away from this idea of just getting credit and actually building community and doing the things that matter? So it's a big open question, Lily. I don't have the answer, but that's something that I've been thinking about a lot.
That's a deep question because I feel like there's a correlation between how privileged you are and how big your ego is. And the more
Yeah.
privileged we become, we also want to build our brand and create our own online identity. I think you brought up a really great point. Even with my podcast, I definitely think about growth, but then I'm like, wait, at the end of the day, what is my whole point of creating this podcast? Is it to solve climate change or is it to grow my brand? Like
Yeah.
sometimes on some days we forget.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard. And especially because we've come from a corporate background, it's
So true.
really, no one talks about this. And it's like hard to juggle your ego and the real
So hard.
impact. And sometimes I find myself lying to myself on
I
why
do
I'm
too.
doing what I'm doing. And people don't talk, social impact leaders don't talk enough about how a lot of
So
us have
true.
an ego and we need to undo it. I
True.
will be the first to say that I can be very narcissistic sometimes, but at least I'm a very self aware person and I am not perfect, but I recognize how much jumbled up nonsense there is in the work that we do. So I don't know. I'm definitely trying to forge a path forward that's not
Mhm.
about me and like how great Soapbox is. So
And I think that's awesome. I'll be the
yeah.
second person to admit I also have a big ego and I spend a lot of time on crafting the graphics and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, I think the good thing is that we're still impact driven. And there are people out there with just an ego and they don't even care about impact. We're still marginally better than people out there who are only doing it for the ego. At least we're doing
and
it for
we
ego
will
and the impact.
and we will continue to be better.
Exactly. Who's to say that Elon Musk didn't build Tesla and like
Ugh.
Hyperloop all this stuff for his ego? How do you know he's really trying to save the planet?
I think actually he's a really good example of how people have hailed him as this savior of the earth through Tesla. And you can see now through his push for Bitcoin and his like the amount of trash that he's creating through
Yeah,
his Mars expeditions. Like you can see so clearly that the story that we tell about these great environmental leaders isn't true. And I think the journey of Tesla would have gone so differently if he actually leaned in to listen to the communities that are now being trashed by the things that he's making. But anyway, I think we could spend a
absolutely.
whole podcast just talking about my
Oh,
opinions.
he's done a lot of controversial stuff. And at this point, sometimes I do question his mission at the end of the day. Is it to really save the planet or is it to build himself a spaceship he can get on
Absolutely.
it? We need definitely to amplify the voices of indigenous communities and these communities who are actually experiencing climate change and the harsh reality and the impacts of it completely. So could you name some activists or organizations that currently doing work in climate justice and how they are creating impact?
Yeah, so I'll share with you three. The first one, she's now like Insta famous. Her handle is Green Girl Leah, but her name is Leah Thomas. She was just named as a grist fixer. And she has been the reason a lot of younger people are starting to understand how all of these issues are connected. So she talks about building community and racial justice and climate. And I think her feed is really wholesome and it makes me happy to look at. I really like following her journey. She founded the Intersectional Environmentalist. So she's a great place to start. The second is technically a book, but it's also a collection of all these women in the climate movement called All We Can Save. I mentioned it earlier, but it has so many powerful stories on people doing the work in climate justice. And so they have women from the South and women from Black and Indigenous communities. And I thought it was a very powerful way to see how people from these underrepresented and underestimated communities are really leading on these issues and not getting
Mhm.
credit for them, kind of like we just talked about. So, All We Can Say was such a powerful way for me to find more people to follow and different organizations to keep up with. And the last thing that you've definitely heard of is Sunrise Movement.
Absolutely.
So Sunrise Movement's so powerful because they do link all of these issues together. Their impact is the most tangible. They were behind the Green New Deal, which has, let's call it, trickled into Joe Biden's infrastructure plan. Some might say copied, but yeah, you will see a lot of stuff coming up in the United States that is labeled as a jobs plan, but really also includes lifting up communities of color. And all of that interconnectedness comes from the Green New Deal. I know different people have different opinions on AOC, but I think her Instagram lives and Instagram stories, I've never seen another person that can connect so many issues in such a
So
short
true.
amount of time. The way she thinks is just brilliant. So I really enjoy following her to try to understand how I can also communicate some of my ideas in the same way.
Definitely. And AOC has such an infectious energy and courage. Like, despite whether you agree with her or disagree with her, there are very few politicians like her who actually genuinely care about the community and have the courage to speak up
Yeah.
against dominant narrative there. So I definitely applaud her for doing that. And you're right, she does so well connecting all these issues like income inequality, climate change, all these things that we talked about. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I think it's fantastic. And definitely with Sunrise Movement, it's huge. And they've also done so much with solar energy. They're really shaping the energy sector and pushing for green energy and installing all these solar panels and helping make solar energy more accessible and affordable for the.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for recommending us these influencers and books. And definitely listeners go check them out. So the first one was at Green Girl Leah. And the second one is the book All We Can Save, highlighting women and minority voices and leaders who are leading the fight against climate change that you would not necessarily hear about in the mainstream media. And the third one is definitely Sunrise Movement.
Take a moment to assess, if you are on social media, who you're following. When I first got on Twitter, I realized I was only following like tech bros and venture capitalists. Now I follow people from the disability community, the indigenous community, from the South, like all of these geographical places and racial identities and all of these different circles that I, growing up in like a Silicon Valley bubble, would have never met. And it's enriched my life so much, and it's made me smarter, and it's made me more humble. Like, it's really gone a long
Absolutely.
way to knock on some of that ego. So I would just say doing a little audit of who you follow and diversifying that.
Sometimes the internet works like an echo chamber, right? The more you follow something, the more it recommends you that. And then you don't realize you're living in this bubble and all you're hearing are perspectives from tech bros. But you're right.
Yeah.
Once you start to tap into other parts of the planet, you realize people are leading radically different lives and doing radically different things that will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's such an important point. So let's talk about climate change and mental health. Now we're in the middle of a pandemic. Mental health is probably the most relevant topic for everyone who is listening. We're probably all going through moments of anxiety and perhaps even depression from time to time and not knowing where this pandemic is going to take us. And on top of that, we're also experiencing climate change. Can you break it down for us? What is climate anxiety and how is climate change impacting the mental health of the younger generation? And why is it problematic and what can we do about it?
So, climate anxiety, as you might be able to tell from the word, is basically the anxiety that comes with living as a person with this huge existential threat of climate change looming around us. It's also called eco-anxiety, ecological anxiety. But as Lily said, we're in a pandemic. If there's one takeaway from this podcast, it really should be how everything is connected, right? COVID is making our physical health worse, our mental health worse, not just in the disease itself, but a lot of us are sitting for longer at our laptops. All of these issues are so interconnected, but specifically with climate change, there's actually been scientific studies. It really breaks down how climate change can manifest negatively on your mental health. One example is heat. If you're exposed to intense periods of heat, people get heat strokes and heart attacks more. And climate change makes, we used to call it global warming, but that makes it worse. Extreme heat exposure is bad for your body, it's bad for your mind. And then again, if you already live with a disability or a negative health condition, for example, asthma, climate change is going to make it worse. Speaking as a Californian, as someone that has endured multiple seasons of the wildfires, if you are already impacted by something like poverty, like a disability, climate change is going to make that worse. And there is no way that you can separate that from your mental health. So, for example, if you lose your home, if you're displaced, that can lead to PTSD. It's all connected. And it's not just in the United States. One thing that you've probably heard of that's been going on in India is the farmer strikes, and they have been experiencing economic abuse and intense periods of droughts, and the rates of farmer suicide have increased, and it's all correlated with climate change because obviously climate change makes things like food scarcity worse.
Yes.
So that's my spiel on the different ways that climate anxiety can permeate, and also just anxiety, right? It's like this tangible detriment that climate change is having on our society.
Absolutely. There's like the philosophical aspect of this looming crisis, and then there's the very real practical consequences we feel. For example, reduction in crop yields that directly affect, farmers' output, and this is affecting their lives, and they can't pay and put food on the table because now
Yeah.
they've lost their crops.
And if you can't put food on the table, your mental health is going to suffer. So
Exactly.
I don't know if we're yet calling that climate anxiety, because I think right now when we talk about climate anxiety, we're saying like, oh, you're scared about climate change. But I think that we have to look at it in a broader way.
Yes.
Like, we have to look at if you lose your home in a flood and you're forced to move and
Mhm.
you are stressed out because you're a single mom, like, obviously your mental health is going to suffer. And that to me is like even bigger than just, oh, climate change is bad.
I agree. We have to look at all aspects. It's not just about like this worry about this far away problem. First of all, climate change is not that far away. Yes, there are very real impacts that we feel on a day-to-day basis. And especially with the recent wave of all the hate crimes that we're seeing with people's mental health declining, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and climate change is like a multiplier. Like you said, it's only going to make it worse. And I dare not to say that there will be more mass shootings or crimes because of this, but it's inevitable that with climate change, some people are going to lose their jobs and some people are going to suffer from health conditions. But not to be all too doom and gloom about it. We will get into solutions for how to mitigate that and what are some really good ways to fight this anxiety. But just to add to that, I read a book called The Uninhabitable Earth, written by David Wallace Wells. I've quoted this multiple times in my podcast. Really great book, really detailed, and that it documented cities with poor air quality index actually observed lowered cognitive functions and academic performance in students. That was really interesting because I never thought like, okay, like poor air quality leads to lowered cognitive and executive functions in your brain, and that ultimately affects a person's success and outcome in life.
Yeah. And that's why we need leaders from poor communities or
Exactly.
communities that have been screwed over by governments. That's why we need leaders to not just be in this fight, but really to be telling us, like, they are the experts. I grew up in San Jose in the Silicon Valley bubble. I didn't really have to suffer low air quality, and my family was never rich, but would not have encountered some of the same difficulties of these other communities. And that's why it
Mhm.
took me more than 20 years to see how all of these issues are interconnected.
Mhm.
And it's because of reasons like you said, like you might have never thought about poor air quality and executive dysfunction and stuff. But some of these communities have been knowing about these and thinking about these for way
Mhm.
longer than we've been alive. And so I think that like stories like what you just shared are so important in underlining why we need not just rich white slash privileged people in this.
Totally. Okay, so finally getting into the more optimistic part of the conversation, what are some ways to tackle eco anxiety?
Yeah. So I think for me that fighting climate change has been a source of joy and fun. I was going to show you this in the beginning. Sorry
Yes, tell
to
us.
audio only listeners, but okay, I'm going to describe this. So I have a little
Ooh,
salt and pepper shaker, and it's in a pea pod. And since this podcast is make peas, not beef, I wanted to show
yes,
it to you.
that's so
And
cute.
the reason that I had this show and tell was one of the groups that I joined is called Buy Nothing, and it's the
I've heard of it.
buynothingproject.org. And it is great because, so as many of the listeners know, consumerism is one of the main
Yeah.
aspects of how climate change is worsened. We buy so much stuff, we trash so much stuff, we're wasting fossil fuels. And so buying secondhand and getting stuff secondhand has been like a new fun hobby in my life.
Ooh.
And Buy Nothing is basically a hyper local gifting economy. You can get stuff from your neighbors and give stuff to your neighbors for free. So I don't know if you see like all these floating shelves behind me. I got those for free from Buy Nothing. This is all to say, like, eco anxiety I'm not going to say stop having anxiety because that's impossible, but I don't know that just wallowing in eco anxiety is productive.
Mhm.
I have found so many ways to turn this into joyful expeditions and adventures. Like, I got
Yes.
my little salt and pepper pea shaker. That's like a fun kind of like superficial layer on how you can, in your individual life, you can get creative with food by fighting food waste in your kitchen. That's probably the thing that I'm most passionate about within climate because I love to eat. Um,
Who doesn't?
yeah, exactly. And 60% of global food waste comes from our households. Usually it's, oh, corporations are the problem or whatever. But with food, we can actually impact it from our household. It's actually a place where individual action makes an impact. So I would say the first way to tackle eco anxiety is to just find your place on how you can just find joy within sustainability. If you love fashion, figure out a way to fight climate change from that perspective. Get involved with sustainable fashion movements, whatever. You are a multifaceted human being. You're not just a scared turtle that is nervous about climate change. So, as your wonderful, multifaceted self, like figure out what works for you. The second thing is figure out how you're connected to what's happening now. So, for example, I'm trying to learn more about what it means to be an Indian woman and to come from India. And I felt very distant from the farmers' strikes, but I'm trying to understand the caste system and how I have been connected to an oppressive caste and how I need to unlearn a lot of those things. So I would say figure out your place in all of the issues that are happening now. And the third thing, which is related, is make sure that when you fight climate anxiety, it's tied to climate justice. So I read a very interesting paper on how climate anxiety is a white phenomenon, on how people want things to return back to normal. And I never thought of that. And I'm not here to criticize. I'm not here to say stop being scared of climate change. It's scary. But I will say that some people, when you don't see these issues as interconnected, in that article, they were like, oh, yeah, one girl said that she would be okay living under a dictator if we could reverse climate change. That's not it. So if you're feeling anxious, light a soy candle, take care of yourself, and then figure out a holistic solution and a community that you can be part of. Progress does not happen alone. And
Yes.
for me, I'm still scared about climate change, but I'm not like paralyzed by it because now I have friends. Like I'm meeting people like you, Lily, and
Exactly. Same.
there's so many positive things in my life that have happened when I have decided to be part of the solution instead of being like, oh no, I'm part of this problem. So, yeah.
Completely agree with you on that last point. 100% become part of the solution. That is the best way to tackle this anxiety of yours because you're doing something about it and you are
Exactly.
actively working towards. And same here. I used to think I'm the only person who cared about climate change until I joined Work on Climate. Then I met you and learned about the fantastic work that you're doing, and then all these other entrepreneurs. I'm like, I have hope because now we can build a coalition.
Exactly.
And funny story with your floating shelves. So you received those secondhand for free. I've given away floating shelves. See, to my
I
point.
love it. I love it.
I know if we lived in the same city, I would have been your donor. But
Exactly.
nowadays, I buy everything secondhand as well. Not because I cannot afford it, but I don't want to add
And
more
it's
waste.
fun. Like I set up my whole house basically secondhand, and it was like
I cannot tell.
really like a fun surprise to see. I didn't know what furniture I was gonna get, and now we have a whole coffee corner behind me. So yeah, it's been great.
That is beautiful. What else in your house is secondhand?
Oh, everything. I wrote a whole article about it. You can find it on the Soapbox site, but okay, I
Wow.
shouldn't say everything, but the couch, the dining table, you can't see it behind me, but it expands into this huge 8-person, like it's a great dining table. I got it for like $20 on Facebook Marketplace. One of the things that I want to share is that we got our 5 dining chairs all secondhand, all for free from Buy Nothing, but they were given to us from 2 different households. Somehow we got a matching set of dining chairs. So that was fun.
That is a miracle.
It's
you
a
like
miracle, but it's also IKEA. So like the probability is a little higher, but still,
Hey,
it was a good time.
Still, that is a miracle. I was like, did you work your law of attraction magic? Be like, please,
Basically.
that is incredible. Yeah, thank you, Nivi, for sharing with us some great ways to fight eco anxiety. And yes, the most important thing is to become part of the solution and be creative.
Yes.
And And now getting into the most interesting part that I really want to get into in this episode. Sorry that it took so long. I definitely want to talk about your crazy career trajectory and your super inspiring story, because I saw that you wrote this article on Medium, which I love. And you talked about how you were laid off at Accenture because you prioritized your North Star, aka driving real social impact over chargeability, basically means profitability of the firm. I love how brave you were and how you stuck to your values and principles. And since then, you went on to found the Soapbox Project and became an entrepreneur. Tell me, how has the entrepreneur life been? And what's the biggest thing you've learned since quitting Accenture and chasing after your North Star?
So I'll tell you in a second, but I think, first of all, thank you that you found my journey super inspiring, because I posted that article on Medium, and there's this like consulting anonymous app called Fishbowl where you could basically talk smack about consulting. And somebody shared it on Fishbowl. And I don't have the app, but my friends were screenshotting me, and basically all of these people were coming out of the woodwork being like, oh, didn't she know what she got into by working for a consulting firm? Like, it's not a volunteer job. And I was like, okay. So I was briefly famous on Fishbowl.
That's amazing.
Anyway, yeah. So I was working at Accenture from 2017 to 2020, and I got laid off in fall of 2020. If you ask anyone in HR, they will not back up the thing that it was because of social impact, because who wants to say that? When it's understandable. I was spending more time pursuing social impact than some of these full-time chargeable roles. And it's not that I was trying to be a renegade or a rebel and go off and do my own thing. No, I was trying to get support for my project and make it good for the company. Like, I was working on wildfire response stuff since 2018. I saw how much money there was in it. So I wasn't like, oh, let's just save the people. I know what I was getting myself into.
Right.
But I also know that we've lost billions of dollars since 2018 alone. I think in 2018 it was like $80 billion of infrastructure due to the wildfires. I don't quote me on that number, but I saw that there was this economic opportunity and a social opportunity. And so since then, I was like on and off trying to get Accenture into some of these wildfire initiatives that I was working on. And the highest levels of leadership were very supportive, but that doesn't play out at such a big company when I might be talking to a leader that supports me, but HR somewhere else is just looking at the numbers. I think what happened is they were like, oh, her numbers are lower than everyone else's. Bye-bye. And so I don't hold them. I'm not like, oh, Accenture is bad. No, I had a good experience there. But I will say that corporations make it very hard for you to pursue something that's like profit plus social impact, even though it benefits them. That's the biggest thing that blew my mind.
I know.
Is the ideas that we have, we as an entry level people, the ideas and the knowledge that we have, like fresh out of college or whatever, are so valuable. They tell you when they hire you, like, oh, this is why we're hiring you, so you can make the world better.
Yes.
And then when you actually try to do that, the response is, oh no, what we meant is do this job that a robot could do or whatever. I'm probably being a little too cynical, but yeah, one of the biggest things that I don't know why this is like such a kept secret.
Tell us.
Is just the scammery of corporate America. Like, they draw you in by telling you, oh, you're going to change the world, you're going to talk to all these important people, and they don't make that happen. And so at Accenture, I actually like to give people and even corporations the benefit of the doubt. I met a lot of amazing people. I even got to share a stage with the CEO telling her about my wildfire work, CEO of a 500,000 person company. So I thought, I was like, finally, I'm breaking this mold. Like, I am changing the world. But what I thought was so interesting is, even if all the people are on your side, the corporate system isn't. And I don't know how to explain that, because I got all this unequivocal support from leaders, but still when it came down to it, I got laid off. And it's because the corporate machine, it seems like it's more powerful than the highest leaders, which kind of blows my mind and it's scary.
I love that observation. Yeah. It's so accurate.
Just to double down on this, as I was leaving, I talked to, again, one of the highest up people. He didn't technically offer to hire me back, but we had a very interesting conversation where I gave him very candid feedback. And the response that I got from him for the first 20 minutes of our call was very defensive. And he was like, no, we are trying our best. And so I just thought it was interesting that even the people that have the most power are still battling against this corporate messaging and whatever, even though they are the corporation. So anyway, just my thoughts on what I've been learning at
Yeah.
Accenture.
On a similar note, what you said reminded me of something that a previous guest on my podcast has said about people wanting to do the right things to be sustainable, but the incentives are just so perverse on a
Yes.
systemic level.
Yes, exactly. It is such a incentives driven thing. So the conversation that I just mentioned, so what I actually was proposing is, hey, one thing that you can do to prevent people like me, because he was like, oh, you got laid off, like blah, blah, blah. How can we change this? And I was like, listen, one thing that we can do is to let people during their job actually volunteer in their community or start a project or something like Google's 20% thing where employees can use 20% of their time to do whatever they want. But I was like, even if it's 5%, give people a channel to make an impact. And he seemed like he was considering it, but you know what he said? He was like, "Oh yeah, that's so easy. We can totally make that happen." And I was like, "No, that's not." I talked to so many people. It wasn't until I got laid off that I could actually anyway, but that's an incentive, right? Like more people would make a change if they knew it was being recognized by their employer instead of my change being recognized to an extent. It backfired and I got laid off. So I think it is all about incentives. And I think it's up to corporate leaders to make the incentives less perverse. And they do have that power, but they really have to fight to see it because by the time you're a corporate executive, you've already been fed this narrative that, oh, profit has to be maximized and it like gives you blinders. And so, yeah, I just think people need to, leaders especially, need to use their power to make change by changing incentives.
Completely agree with that. I feel like starting out at a consulting firm, your mindset is very different, like 5 years into the job, 10 years into the job. And then by the time you make it to senior leadership, you might have forgotten a lot of the reasons why you wanted to join this company in the first place. Some of the leaders, maybe they genuinely want to do good things, but at that point, the corporation is so large. Like even as an executive, like even as the president of the United States, you only have so much power.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think it's really important that we rouse the public into action, like you said. Maybe it has to be a bottom up thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was so brave for you to still be able to stick to your vision regardless and not cave in. Because you could have easily just be like, okay, I'm gonna do the profitable thing and keep working Accenture and keep my job.
Yeah, it's hard. And going back to AOC, I see a lot of people from the left just like being like, oh, she's a sellout. And I hate that. I'm all for holding politicians accountable, even the ones that I personally like. But there's one thing to say, oh, this politician has accepted money from Wall Street, they're a sellout. It's a totally another thing to say, oh, this politician is working with more conservative Democrats and she's a sellout. Like, I just hate the
that.
purity culture of
Same.
the social justice and environmental movement. And I think that really hinders progress. And even at Accenture, I had to make trade-offs. Like I'm sorry, but you can't just hold on to everything you want and make change, right? Like it's impossible. Even in order for me to keep my job for 3 years and talk to the CEO and even get that level of visibility, I had to compromise some of my time, not my values, but I had to compromise some of my time. I had to work on projects that I didn't really want to work on, but I wasn't just able to focus on this one mission and live my life. And so I think people that talk ill of others just because they are like making compromises, I just think that sucks because especially when you do that to leaders and politicians for bad faith, I will be very sad to see someone like AOC leave office because she's like, okay, people just don't value my efforts. If I was her, that's like, that would burn me out. But yeah, at Accenture, if people were like, oh, Nivi, why were you doing a for-profit project? That would burn me out too. And so I think that this idea of progress over perfection is so important.
Oh my gosh. I really hope AOC does not quit. I think she's very mentally strong. I feel like she's resilient enough to go against this. But
yeah, But she did do this article, an interview in the New York Times when she was like, people from both parties hate me and it's
It's
exhausting.
hard.
So
It's hard being hard, but she's trying to do the best thing because she's trying to
yeah.
reach bipartisan agreement. But that's the ridiculous part about America. Like the Republicans and Democrats are opposing one another for the sake of, and then within the Democratic Party, there's so much like different arms. Whereas in a lot of Scandinavian countries, both the left and right agree on climate change, and they both agree this is an issue. Like, why do you have to disagree for the sake of disagreeing? I think it's so important that you still stuck to your vision and you focus on doing the right thing. And look at where you're at now. You're an entrepreneur, and I guess this is a path that you've never thought about taking, or
I had not thought of myself as an entrepreneur until maybe the year before I left. I really thought I was going to stay at Accenture longer. I thought consulting was going to be my thing. I was good at it. Once I joined, though, I was like, oh, this is not what I thought. This is not what I thought consulting was going to be. But the idea of consulting, I was like, that's great.
it's enticing.
I've considered a lot of different careers, like going into law, going into politics. I had not really considered entrepreneurship, but I saw that nobody else was tackling this middle ground of meeting people where they are to make change through this like fun, joyful community lens. There's some tools that do a good job of this middle ground activism. I don't know if that's the right word, but things like change.org and GoFundMe, where if you don't have a lot of time, you can still get involved. But those are not like ongoing, they don't support you through this journey. And I needed something like Soapbox. So I was like, I guess I'll just start something. And then I started meeting more entrepreneurs and it just became something that I was passionate about. So I think life dropped me into this entrepreneur bucket, but I have no regrets. I do get stressed out about money, especially because I'm so early stage right now and we a couple $100 each month. And I'm lucky to have savings from my time at Accenture. I still get to wake up every morning looking forward to my job, which
Exactly.
is something that I never had for 3 years at Accenture.
Oh, I'm so happy
So
for you.
yeah, I think the worst days of an entrepreneur suck, but it doesn't compare to the worst days in consulting where I just felt very powerless. But now I no longer feel powerless and I feel much more in control of my life and my choices. And
Mhm.
I would not trade that for anything.
Totally. You have full ownership now. You are your own boss and you can
Yeah.
steer Soapbox product however you want. And wow, that is so empowering. And trust me, with time, it's going to grow. But with any business idea, you have to be patient, right? And
Yeah.
time is like the magic ingredient. You just
Yeah.
don't give up and just keep at it. Like some people just go way longer.
Exactly.
That's why they succeeded. But I think you're filling in such an important space. And by the way, I'm curious, like who can you describe your ideal target audience for me? What would that person look like?
So that's it's funny because my target audience is basically people like myself, like zillennials that work in tech or business, either at these big corporations or startups. So people like you and me, Lily. But then in December, we got featured in the New York Times. And so now that was a fantastic, unexpected, fantastic gift.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it wasn't just like a quote, it was like a third of the article, which was so cool. And I
Wow.
had no idea. Aside from the celebration of how awesome that was, that brought in a lot of people that are older, a lot of parents. And so I'm still grasping with this question because I have only the perspective of being a zillennial and I don't really understand what it's like to
Wait,
be
what
retired.
is a zillennial? I still don't get it.
I coined that term of older Gen Zs and younger millennials, like people 20 to 30 years old.
Got it.
Um, yeah,
Definitely
there's
there.
so much debate on who's a millennial and who's a Gen Z, so I just
I
combined
know.
them.
Nice.
But yeah, I guess the answer is I'm learning a lot about who the audience is. We have people, oh, we had someone sign up that like lives in the Arctic Circle. And so it's really not anymore my expected audience.
Yeah, maybe you're reaching corners of the world that you didn't even know that you were
Exactly. It's been
reaching.
wild.
That's the best part. I actually see it as such a huge blessing. And by the way, congratulations on making it to New York Times. That is huge. Like you've only been
Thank
running
you.
this Soapbox project for how long? Less than a year.
Yeah, I've been working on it as a side project since 2019, but I went full time on it in September 2020. So it's been 7 full months.
Wow, and you're making so much progress on this front. Like, geez,
It feels like I'm not like on a daily
are you
basis.
kidding me?
I know, like sometimes I'll refresh my subscriber count and like 2 people will have signed up. But I recently did a quarterly review and I realized that I actually made a lot of progress. But I think that's like
The-
another thing, like zooming out is so important
Exactly.
because when you're just stuck in it, I'm like, I suck and I'm not getting any monies.
No, you do not suck. And the fact that you have already started something, like, you don't know how many people I have in my life. Like my friends tell me, oh, I want to start this project. Oh, I want to start a business. And then 10 years later, like still nothing has been started.
Yeah, really.
So you're already winning by the fact that, and by the way, I've looked at your website, your newsletters, everything looks so professional. And it really
Thank you.
speaks to the Zillennial audience, like you said, like with all the emojis. And I love how you designed your website. It's beautiful.
Thank
Everyone, please go check it out at the Soapbox Project. And by the way, can you just give us like a 3-minute breakdown of all this like Bitcoin stuff? Because I saw that you were talking about the environmental impact of Bitcoin, and I was like fascinated by it.
Yeah. So Bitcoin, I was scared as hell to tackle it as a topic because I'm not a crypto expert and I know that Bitcoin bros are a real thing. And I was like afraid that I would just get so many replies in my inbox being like, you suck. I actually did get some amount of Twitter harassment, but it was,
Really?
yeah, I don't understand why like people tie their whole identity to a currency, but
I don't get it.
but basically Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, and I think cryptocurrency is like a very cool alternative for how currency can be distributed and less corruptible. And I think as a concept, it's great. But in order for the currency to be verifiable, there has to be a technology that verifies it. So
Mhm.
the way that Bitcoin works expends a lot of computational power. And us sitting at home, we can probably understand that when we're streaming a movie or when we're downloading a game, you hear your laptop like heating up and it's having a hard time.
Yep.
At least mine does. And so
Yep.
imagine that with Bitcoin, but in epic proportions. And so I was reading the stat about how Bitcoin expends more electricity than Argentina. And that blew my mind. I was like, how is this one way of a cryptocurrency operating in the top 30 energy consumers? So if Bitcoin was a country, it would be in the top 30 electricity consumers. And I wanted to talk about it because I think we're at this turning point where we can choose to adopt Bitcoin or we can choose to get excited about cryptocurrency, but also fight for the environmentally friendly version. And so I wanted to speak out and I wanted to educate people because I'm not saying if you mine Bitcoin, you're bad. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm saying if you're passionate about Bitcoin, it is your responsibility to educate yourself on how it works. It's your responsibility to see how you can advocate for either Bitcoin alternatives, or I don't know how maybe you could make Bitcoin itself greener, run on solar, things like that. But yeah, I think that the mainstream Bitcoin culture is toxic. And I saw that from how much just straight up hate that I was getting instead of people being like, yeah, this is a good point and like engaging in good faith. So I think there's a bright future in cryptocurrency. And I really hope that instead of people just talking about it like this cool trend, they will actually critically think about what it means if the whole world was to adopt Bitcoin. Like, how would that affect income inequality? How would that affect emissions? Is Bitcoin the right move? Should we find another alternative? So I think there's a lot of thinking to do, and I am overthinked from Bitcoin, but that's a little overview.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm so sorry you got so much harassment, but the sad reality is that the vast majority of people on Twitter don't critically think. They jump on this new trend and everybody starts retweeting without even like finish. Like sometimes people just retweet the headlines. They don't even click on the article and actually read what the article
Yeah.
says.
Yeah.
I've probably been guilty of doing that when I was in my younger years, but nowadays I definitely read before I retweet.
And they have this like new, oh, do you want to read the article first? Because I'm still guilty of that. But every time I'm like, oh, yeah, I should read it.
And the same thing I would say with electric cars. Everybody's now like super pro electric car. But do you understand the environmental impact of lithium and the current state of the infrastructure? 95% of lithium is thrown out, even though it's a highly recyclable material.
I didn't know that.
So yeah, only about
Nope.
5% of lithium is recycled, and lithium is highly toxic if you do not dispose it correctly. And so there's this huge controversy around lithium mining with electric cars as well. Everything is a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
But I'm still a public transit person, so I find this whole car thing slightly less, yeah, not relatable for me, but it's better than driving a huge truck.
Yeah.
I guess you live in California, so you probably need to drive.
I moved to Seattle. Yeah. I still need to drive, but because of COVID, my partner bikes to work and I don't really have
Oh,
anywhere to be. So, other than grocery shopping, we don't really use our car and we both have bicycles. So, when we
it's
get
really great.
coffee, like, yeah, We try to, and we live in a central-ish place of town. It's just a lot happier than being stuck in traffic too. It's the whole thing about how
I agree.
sustainability is joyful.
It really is. Who enjoys 3 hours of like traffic congestion and you can't even go pee if you like? Why do people like to be stuck in their car? Like, I just rather be outside. If you're biking, you're connected to nature, the breeze on your face, like, everything feels great, right?
And it's like an automatic workout, and then you don't have to work out the rest of the day if you already rode your bike.
Exactly. Oh, America's obsession with cars. And I agree with you. Nivi, you're the ambassador for the Soapbox Project. So what are your top 3 bite-sized actionable plans to tackle climate change that you would recommend to our listeners?
This one's very biased, but I think my top one is probably anything that we've done on food waste, especially if you're new to the fight against climate change. Food is the easiest place to start. We all eat it. We can all make better decisions around it. So that's probably the first one. The second one is our most recent fashion one. Fashion is another one of those things where if you don't really know about it, it's another place where you can make a difference. And then I think the third one is from June of 2020, and that is our environmental justice one. I tried to lay out things that helped me connect all the dots. So hopefully it does the same for other people.
I love it. A lot of people don't understand, like, what is the environmental impact of the textile industry? It uses huge amounts of oil and water and also dyes for denim if you like jeans. So yes, look into it.
Oh, you want to know something like wild?
Tell me.
I just feel like there's so many obvious truths that people don't know, including me. I didn't know until I started writing the newsletter about how plastic was made. And I just never bothered to find out. And then I watched a 6-minute National Geographic video that was like, oil is extracted and then made into plastic.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, what the heck? Everything comes back to big oil. I didn't even know that.
Absolutely. Plastic bags, a lot of things. And by the way, palm oil, one of the most controversial kinds of oils on the planet, right? Which is like in food and clothing and probably everything you touch. And we're cutting down rainforests just to harvest palm oil. Yes, everything does come back to oil at the end of the day. It's so funny because people are like, yeah, why don't we just cut down less trees? Well, that's because we need to cut the trees so then we can grow livestock and for meat consumption, all this. So at the end of the day, who's fueling the logging?
Yeah,
it's us.
It's wild.
I know. So it's really great that you took the time to educate yourself on this and to understand why we're not supposed to just stop cutting down trees. So, in conclusion, Nivi, thank you so much for sharing with us your incredibly inspiring story from Accenture to entrepreneur, and then sharing with us tips on how to fight climate change, racial injustice, and mental health challenges all at the same time. And like you said, the key takeaway from this episode is that everything is connected. And if you care about climate change, or if you care about racial justice or mental health, then you should tackle all 3 and not having to choose between them. So, Nivi, share your social media website with us, and how can people subscribe to the Soapbox Project?
Yeah. So if you are looking for a way to get involved, you can sign up for our change letters, and our website is soapboxproject.org. You'll see the email sign up thing as soon as you get on there. And you can also see our past work and a bunch of other fun stuff that we've written about. That's probably the easiest way to just sign up, let the information come to you. It comes straight to your inbox, and each one takes less than 3 minutes to read. For people that are just starting out, like I told you, I'm like lazy, short attention span. I write these for people like me. So definitely check that out. We're also on all the social medias, but probably the best one is Instagram, and it's just at Soapbox Project. And yeah, I would love for people that are interested to join. We have some exciting opportunities coming, and the best way to keep up is just through our website at soapboxproject.org.
Love it. And by the way, it's ran by all women, because I was reading the profiles of your team members.
Yeah, I could not have done this without them. So Melena, Bella, Senya, if you're listening to this, huge props. All the stuff that you see on our social media is run by not me. Sometimes you have a brand Insta and you're commenting on it, but when I comment like, oh wow, what a cool fact, I'm actually learning some of this stuff for the first time. So
I love that.
Yeah.
Wow, this is awesome. Look at just how much has happened since you left Accenture. Wasn't that like the greatest decision you've ever made in retrospect?
Yeah, it was good. Like they made it for me and I didn't have to really think about it. All I had to do was like not look for another job, and I think it's working out. So as long as I don't run out of money, I will be good to go.
Yes. Oh, the money will come. Trust me. You're solving one of the world's like biggest issues, of course. And more people will pay attention to it for sure. Thank you, Nivi, so much for your time on Make Peace Not Beef. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in.
Thanks, Lily, for having me on.
I will see you in the next episode.